Hi guys, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to get into one of my favorite executive orders. You've heard me say it a billion times. We've talked about it in the past, but I've never really kind of done as deep of a look at it as we'll see right here. We're talking about Executive Order 13818. It was one of the most confusing executive orders when it was first when it first came out. Because I remember, there's a person who doesn't like me, but that's okay. I still like her. It's Santa Surfing. As she and I were talking about this years ago. I didn't get it. She didn't get it. We were looking at each other like, I don't get what this thing is. When you see Executive Order 13818, let me pull it up on the screen. It says some crazy stuff. I mean, it says things like blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights and corruption. I'm like, and this is in December of 2017. So this is only about a year and a half-ish, or almost 2 years, close to 2 years, from his close to 1 year from the beginning of Trump's term. And you're going, what? Why would he bring this up? And and I'm not going to show this in this one, but this thing has actually been kept up. If you watch the other video I had on Tuesday, you guys are going to see this on Thursday of the 5th. And on Thursday the 5th, you're going to watch this video when you see this. And what I was talking about on the first executive order of 13848 is that they kept it going. Like, why would the idiots keep it going? And yet this one is actually kept going, and I'm not going to show it to you, but you can go look that up and you can see it. It's so fascinating that this thing happens. Okay, so what it says, it talks about emergency powers, economic powers. Okay, it's the same exact wordings. See that the idiots, the elites, stole Trump's wording from Executive Order 13848 when they updated it, and they pulled it directly from this information. So, like they're laying the boot on their forehead. It's the dumbest idea to keep going because you would have wanted this thing to die off. Because what it talks about, and it talks about the severity of human rights, and it goes through that and explains it a little bit more. And what it goes through is several different ways that it will block you. Persons listed in the annex of this order determined by Secretary of Treasury. It does not care about the Fed. Wait a second. If you're talking about economic issues, don't you want to talk to the Fed? Those of you who beloved the Fed or believe that the Fed is the only thing and it's going to stick around, I'm telling you right now, this is the key. The key mark, the hallmark, the keystone, I said that wrong, keystone of Nasara. This is the key element of it because he puts the Treasury on top of the heap. It says that any foreign person determined by the Secretary of Treasury in consultation of Secretary of State and Attorney General, which would have been Barr at the time. That's why he's an important character, even though he's an idiot. But issues, what it basically talks about is misappropriation of state assets. Wait a second. How could anyone appropriate state assets? Let me back up for half a second. I just want you to think about that for a second. Who could appropriate state assets? Defense contractors. Think about a bunch of them. Anyone who does defense contracts and somehow moves those state secrets to foreign governments, which is a big treasonous point, and yet they do it all the time. And what did Joe Biden do in Afghanistan? What did he do? He left all kinds of state secrets of products. I mean, do you know how much they would just adore getting the product in front of them? In the the Tom Clancy movie, and I'm blanking the name out, and you probably can come up with it in a second here, and you'll probably type it in. That's fine. Tom Clancy, and we have Morgan Freeman who walks into the Soviet-style nuclear facility, and they're talking about this. He's looking around, and he's got Jack Ryan behind him, and he's looking at this missile in front of him. He goes, "I tried to bring a ton of people into this area," and it's the sum of all fears, by the way. So, and the sum of all fears, and he says, "I tried to bring a whole bunch of people in this area, and most of them died." And he's just looking around with awe, because they would have loved to have the Americans or the Germans or the Chinese would have loved to have seen what the Russians were doing, or the Soviets at the time frame. And then we have this interplay with other countries would love to have the American weapon to reverse engineer it. And yet Joe Biden in 2022, I believe it was, left Afghanistan weapons by the billions over there. This is Executive Order 13818. He just dropped it on his head and threw it on everyone who left it there, the Secretary of Defense and all of them. But who do they have to relate to? So let's go backward. Who do they have to talk to? Secretary of Treasury. So anyone defense contracts or anyone who's involved with it in the government. And what it says is that it goes on and describes of those persons whose property interest in the property block pursuant to this order. And it gives all this really weird statements of saying that if you've done this, we're going to take away your property. Now, when I first read this, and goes back to what Santa Surfing and I were talking about years ago, is I was like, I don't get it. She was like, I don't get it either. And both of us were trying to suss this puppy out in 2020. It was before the election. And neither one of us get it. And I started to understand what it was. Is it blocks all these property points. Now, think about if you're a billionaire. Now, every billionaire you've ever heard of has like houses in Australia, and they have houses in Aspen, Colorado, and in Seattle, or pick the area, wherever that might be, right? They have houses everywhere. If you're blocking a property point, and you go, so what I was started to do is I started to pause for just a second. I was like, property. Who does property? You see, most people are thinking about the money. Don't think the money issue. What property is something that corporations control. You see, most people think that rich people keep the property in their own name. And the answer is, that's the stupidest thing in the history of the world. You never want to put the property in your name, because the government or someone else could actually take it from you. But it's more than just take it from you. They could know that you live there. So you add corporation layers so that the property is owned by the particular entity, which is the corporation. So when you say, I block the property, which it extends to some crazier things, because it says in here that when you read through this, and I'll put it in the descriptions because you can read through it yourself. And it says that you can't even move the money around. You couldn't take that piece of property and send it to your wife. You couldn't take the money and move it around, which, by the way, that's exactly what they did in 2018. When these idiots started reading this, they were freaking out. That's why people were getting divorces left and right, so that they could move the money to anyone else, and it blocked it. It is not about a property thing. What it is a bankruptcy of corporations. And one of the things that Santa Surfing did a really gorgeous job years ago is looking at the different corporations who were actually deleted in that time frame, in the 2020 time frame. And you can go look at it. It's fascinating to see how many corporations in the state of Delaware just went away. And that is the cool part of this whole section. Now, what it talks about is the letter on continuity of government. And so this goes into that executive order just a little bit better. He's sending a letter to the Speaker of the House, which would be Nancy at the time. And here's the point. This is where it makes no sense. So think about this for a second. Who's sending this speaker. So they take the executive order 13818 in 2017 and they extend it through 2021. Now, I told you I wasn't going to show you, but well, I did. So I lied. So they did. Why would he extend this one? He put it in to 2021 and they kept doing it. By the way, it's still in vogue. It's still there. And yet Joe Biden in the year of 2021 to 2022 does a million things, including the Afghanistan thing, to drop all kinds of different amounts of money to Ukraine, to Afghanistan, to our enemies. He just proving my point. But it talks about this interesting part of it provides for the termination of national emergency unless 90 days prior to the anniversary date of this declaration, the president publishes in the Federal Register and transmits to Congress a notice stating the emergency is to continue beyond the effective date. So we're talking about that would be in March of 2020. And that's normally the time frame, or March 20th. That's normally the time frame when Lincoln would have been inaugurated, or a little bit into March to April. And they've changed the dates as they've gone along here with this too. So what it says is that he kept doing it. So Joe Biden brings it in as well. And you say, but continuity of government, what in the flock does that mean? It's because when we see continuity of government, and we don't understand why it is, why would the money have anything to do with continuity of government? If you're just talking about billionaires, like Bezos or Bill Gates, or pick the dude that you don't like, whatever. Why would that have anything to do with government? It's because they're all in bed together. And so when you have continuity of government, it wipes them out. It wipes out all of their ability. It rips them out of situation, which means most of the idiots in Congress and most of the idiots in Senate and most of the state senators and state house. You've got mayors, including the Tulsa mayor. You've got the governors everywhere that you can kind of come up with. They're all a part of the silliness. Now, it's not every single governor. It's not every single, Kristi Noem in North Dakota or South Dakota, is pretty good. I think there's other ones out there, but not very many. Okay, and you'd be surprised. But what it talks about, when you have this interesting thing of continuity of government, if you lose your government, what do you have? You have this thing called devolution. And we heard about this and I remember the day after the election, Chris Miller of the DOD talks about this thing about devolution. He uses a terminology and I'm like, what are you talking about? He talks about continuity government. What are you talking about? Why would this be relevant? Here's what devolution actually means. The transference of property responsibility from one another. So the surrender of powers to local authorities by a central government. Listen to that again. The surrender of powers to local authorities by central government. Who the flock would that be? Military. Oh my gosh, guys. Now, if you want to understand this a little bit more, Patriot Patel, years and years ago, I said Cash Patel. No, not right. Patriot Patel does a whole series, and you can look at it Badlands Media. He does a whole series. This is a recap point. I'm going to put this in the description. Definitely check it out. It's got amazing things of what they talk about. The law of war. This is where Derek Johnson gets a lot of his information too, not just from him, but from the executive orders that Patriot Patel goes through. Very popular with this issue. And this stuff is still in vogue. Where does the executive order of 13818 come from? From a constitutional level. It comes from the 14th Amendment under the 4th section. Now, when you understand what the 13th Amendment was about, releasing slavery. And it comes in the same time frame. This is 1868, which is 3 years from the Civil War, 3 years from the time frame when Lincoln was killed by John Wilkes Booth, who didn't really do it only himself. He was the one that shot, but it was a part of the conspiracy of the cabal to take him out because of the greenback dollar. I've spent a lot of time talking about this, and some other people talk about it more, but I was talking about this back in 2020 because it's really important from an economic standpoint. But in the fourth section, now the third section talks about Executive Order 13848, which is about the election issues. But in the same area, we have this crazy statement here. And it says, I'm going to bring this up a little closer so you can read it closer with this too. The validity of public debt of the United States by authorization of law, including debts incurred by payments or pensions, or bounties for services. You're going, what? Bounties for services? What the flock would that mean? Wait a second. Services that were done outside of the country, which is called what we have with the Fed, where they, in suppressing insurrection or rebellion. Like rebellion, how would they have rebellion? Because in the third section of this right, you have the conversation about elections. But the fourth section is about a public debt. It's tying money together. Neither the United States or any state shall assume or pay any of the debts. Any claim against the loss or emancipation of any slave, but all such debts shall be illegal and void. This is why it was, let me bring this off the screen. This is why this particular point here, sorry, bring it off the screen here too. This is why the 14th Amendment is incredibly powerful. It's so super powerful because it says any slave. And so you think it's talking about the 13th Amendment, but who are slaves today? Sit back and think about that one for a sec. Who are slaves today by the 14th Amendment? All of us. When we have debt upon us, what is the federal debt about? Now, I'm going to show this to you here. This is on my website. You can go to drscottyoung.com. So I'm going to bring this up on the screen as soon as it comes up here. So on drscottyoung.com, you can actually go to the bookstore. You can kind of see the things that I have and all kinds of other stuff. By the way, go to my website if you ever want to know. These are the books that I have here. If you want to go to the website, you want to know different things that you can do, like you can download cool stuff out there, right? Download information. But down below, when you go a little farther, you're going to see different projects that I'm doing on the social media out there. But I also put the debt clock on there. Now, I put the debt clock because people ask about it all the time. Now, we know the debt clock is manipulated. We see levels of manipulation that comes in here. But the national debt is what the 14th Amendment was actually saying. Do you catch what I mean there? The 14th Amendment is talking about the national debt, which is done by the Fed, which includes all of the Fed bankers, which is exactly what Executive Order 13818 talks about. And they're all in bed with the government because this is how they do power issues. This is how they do their power plays. Do you see? This is a financial thing, and you have to have a continuity of government because it's going to wipe them out. So not only do we have to worry about, not worry, but we have to deal with, from a military standpoint, all the people who've corrupted elections, which means many in the post offices, many of the people who are in election facilities, right, doing all the election stuff. And we have to deal with all the financial people, which basically messes up the whole level of government with this too. That's why the 14th Amendment is so powerful. And when you see the debt clock, all this stuff that happens out there, the total amount of debt that we have, all of this stuff wipes to a fat old nasty zero. Zero, because you do not assume the debts. So I want you to look at this. See the debts here. You see the total interest paid, the bank interest received. This is all their banking. They get $1 trillion of interest all the time. The student loans, the credit card debts, the total personal debt of $25 billion or trillion dollars, the $101 trillion of debt, the state debts, the local debts, the municipal employees, all this debt that we have with all these crazy level of employees out there, 19 million employees. The debt to GDP is 136. These are the correct numbers here, but there's some other numbers over here that are a little manipulated in there. And we see manipulation out there because we have all kinds of cool little ideas that are coming out there with this too. Now, go backward here, into the 14th Amendment, and we say any debt that was any claim for the losses or emancipation of any slave, you're the debt slave now. Every time we talk about slavery and issues with blacks being owned in the past, you're the debt slave. That is such the cabal telling you are going to be emancipated. This is an emancipation of you. This is why Executive Order 13818 is so dang powerful. It's about emancipating you out of here. It's about doing a devolution of the government, and the only one who's left in that governmental point are not the woke ones, but the real white hat military. Not the woke ones you see on TV, but the white hat military. Wow. Now I want to show you something really interesting, SCOTUS cases. I came across this and saw 10 SCOTUS cases related to the 14th Amendment. And it's kind of interesting, and I don't want to get too far into this here because it'll mess you up with that. But basically, there is a case in 1873, the slaughterhouse cases. It talks about the new 13th and 14th Amendment rights issues. So guess what? It connects those together. What lawyers and judges love to do is create precedent. So this actually created precedent. Now, in the Nassara era, precedent goes away. We're going to go to law issues. Now, if precedent tells me about a law, I'm happy to utilize it. But I'm not going to be able to utilize precedent against the Constitution. See, we've done that in legal cases. That has to go away. And so what they did is they started connecting these things together. They have entitles the citizens of each state and the privileges and the immunities of each citizen out there under the 14th Amendment. Like, holy cow. It adds layers to this. 1896, we have another case in Louisiana legislator passing a law requiring black and white residents to ride separately. Like, this is, and it was knocked down. See, they had for taking a seat on a train reserved for whites only. This is illegal to do, and we utilized the 13th and 14th Amendment. Here's one in 1905. A baker was convicted of violating a Bakeship Act, which is, they made up a law, a local law, and prohibited bakers from working more than 10 hours a day or 60 hours a week. And he goes infringes on his right to contract. So they have to have due process, a clause of the 14th Amendment, and any move that many believe exceeded the judiciary power or the authority. So the judicial authority. Boy, that was hard to say. It's saying we're going to take the 14th Amendment and apply it against the laws of the land. So these are all these really interesting. Brown versus Board of Education utilized a little bit of the 14th Amendment and equal protection points. And you see a huge number of these fascinating cases. You can kind of read through them and get a little idea. Now, let's talk about why people struggle in this. One of the areas I hear all the time is that, we talk about bankruptcy. Now, when you think about bankruptcy as a private citizen, you think, oh my God, you're going to close all the banks. And that's why some truthers have told you, get your money out of the banks because they're going to close. Because they're not thinking how corporations think. So I'm putting out there these points of bankruptcy related to corporations. Why do I say that? Let me remind you again, the 14th Amendment is targeting the corporations. It's blocking the property of those corporations. When you block the property, in essence, you have created a level of bankruptcy. There are two different types of bankruptcies that we're going to talk about here. When you have Chapter 7, this is called liquidation of the firm. What they're going to do is take the firm and say, and I'm going to give you an example. There was I was in a mall for my practice. I was in a mall in a town in North Oklahoma. And I got out of the mall, but it was around the time frame or a little bit after. I don't remember exactly how that worked. And I paid my monthly rent, and we had a lease agreement for a year, I think it was. And then we canceled it and we stopped the whole system because it just wasn't making money. And then I got this bankruptcy notice, and it was a Chapter 7 related to the people who owned the mall. And they were going through Chapter 7 liquidation. And what they were doing is saying and they listed out everyone's name, including mine, my company's name. And it said, if they owe you anything, you don't get anything for it. So they have these fascinating points, and you kind of look at the court systems for liquidation. See, most people think that the companies just purely liquidate them. Anyone who's eligible for the liquidation, what they do is they take all of their assets. The court says, okay, these debts are the top debts. They have to be paid first in a portion. And they actually negotiate like 25 cents on the dollar, 50 cents on the dollar to pay off those debts. And then you don't have any choice in the matter. And I remember when my ex-partner in the business wanted to do a bankruptcy. He did a personal bankruptcy, not Chapter 11, but Chapter 13. That's a personal bankruptcy point. And he gave it to me. And I remember when the state of Oklahoma sent this to me, and it was in 2009. And I'm like, so it's a $70,000 debt. And I'm like, looking, I'm like, what do I do with this? I remember calling the court. They were like, well, you write it off. It's just a business loss. What the flock does that mean? What do I do with that? I mean, I'm not a bank. I don't have the ability just to kind of float it off. I didn't understand that I could actually take that toward future losses, which is a capital gains conversation, and be part of the write-off with that too. Even though he owed it, it was going to be off of my balance sheets. So what they're doing is wiping out that balance sheet and not allowing that company to exist anymore. That will happen to some of these cabal organizations with that too. I would say maybe the CIA goes through Chapter 7. I don't know, but I'm just telling you, not all of them will do that. There's another type of bankruptcy that most people don't think about. It's called reorganization. So Chapter 11, it has proposes a plan of reorganization to keep the business alive and pay the creditors over time. So this is where we get the concept of too big to fail. If you go watch the movie, about the 2008 crisis, and I don't remember when they created it, but just Google "too big to fail" and then go watch it on Amazon or one of those places. Okay, and it's a very interesting movie because what they were doing is that many of the banking people went through a reorganization issue. Lehman Brothers still existed, but they went through reorganization instead of closure. Now, there were closures of some types, okay? but it talks about that reorganization issue. And so what it does is it wipes out levels of debts, but then there are other debts that you cannot wipe out. It's so big of a debt that it would topple economies. See, when you have companies that have such deep levels of that it would wipe out whole economies, they go, well, we're going to just do a bankruptcy reorganization. Now, it is not without really crazy things that it would do to the corporation. And see, when none of these corporations have actually done this. See, what they do is they offload their debts without a reorganization pattern. So Chase Bank will offload her debts. So let's make up a crappy corporation you're thinking of, right? Microsoft. And they had these massive debts. And so they offload it, let's just say to Chase. Let's say that's who they went through, or BOA. And then they take those debts and shove it up to the Fed. The Fed then disperses that by inflation. And that's why we have inflation that happens, because they had to create more debt issues, and they printed the money that they didn't have the money for it. They don't have the money to pay that debt off, and so they create more money, and just rises the level of inflation out there. And then someone buys the debt so that they can maybe like pawn it off to someone else for pennies on the dollar with that too. It's and sometimes they don't even do it at all. But here's what real issues that happens in Chapter 11. So if my company, for instance, decided we could stay in business, and most small businesses don't even qualify for this. They have to be big old nasty ones. They have the schedule of assets and liabilities. They will have to use your income and current expenditures, because now they're thinking about your income that they need to keep going. They execute the contracts in unexpired license, and then they have your financial affairs. Now, this is what they have to move through. And what they do is there's a court cases, there's amounts of money with this too. And the debtors in possession, they have to like go through, the courts will tell them what they can do and what can get paid for. But what happens in this, now again, small businesses almost never get to go through this, okay? But sometimes they can. But these are really for, look at these debts. For unsecured debts of $3 million. Well, I don't know very many small businesses ever do that. Now, I know they say small businesses are 100 employees or less, but I don't know very many businesses have that kind of thing. Or unsecured debts of 7.5 million. That's just a huge number. So that's really, it's going to be for bigger companies, medium-sized companies that really go through this. And what they do is they have an estate debtor, and then the U.S. trustee and the bankruptcy administrator. So that person administrates the rest of the firm, and they will fire people left and right. There is a movie that you need to watch. And in that movie, this is Chapter 11. So in this movie called Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox. And they are actually talking about bankruptcy reorganization in different ways. They're talking about a buyout and a hostile takeover. And hostile takeovers, those are doing Chapter 11s for the most part. And they lop off the top level of people. So what you're going to see is this, when Executive Order 13818 comes into play, only after the EBS, and when we're in the NASARA thing. And some of these places are happening. I believe personally, Wells Fargo is telling you that they've actually been through it, because they're not doing whole levels of things. I've actually shown on my own that Wells Fargo is not doing any financing issues with my company anymore, and they stopped it in September. Doesn't that sound like an interesting date to stop it in? Are we in September now? They're not going to be part of the naming of the Philadelphia Stadium, whatever that's going to be called now. It was called Wells Fargo Arena or whatever it was. And like, wait, they're not going to be what? That is bankruptcy reorganization, and that's Executive Order 13818. So in essence, what this is that you've got these massive companies that have involved all of the world. Because they're so involved and they're so deep inside of this, you have to have continuity of government, because it's going to wipe out the people that did it, which are the corporations. Maybe wipe them out, maybe wipe them down to nothing. But all those people are going away. Now, the company itself might stick around a little bit. It devolves, transfers the rights in governments. This surrenders the powers to local authorities by a central government. That's exactly what we're talking about from a corporational level. And Chris Miller with DOD, and by the way, you can see this on the Patriot Patel series, talks all about this. Guys, this stuff is coming. It's so cool. It's so amazing what's happening in the background. And it's already happening. We're just waiting for the last moment that all this stuff goes away. It's related to the Executive Order 138818 and 848 with this 818. They're married together. They're talked about with one another. Joe Biden pushed out 818 and added it year by year, and it's still going on. It's still happening. I didn't show you all the evidence, but it's still happening there. They want to keep it going because they don't have any control. They've lost all the control. Frankly, they don't want it, but they don't have control of signing those executive orders and making them keep going. Trump is pushing the buttons. That's why he's the CIC and Joe Biden is the corporation president. I hope that helps you understand the bankruptcy of the corporation and the too big to fail point that is much more about this Chapter 11 issue than really closing Chapter 7 issues. It's so cool, guys. And it's all legal because the 14th Amendment actually is a part of this. Gives you a more broader understanding and a historical perspective of 13818. Thank you so much.